Welcome to Central Georgia Focus. I'm your host this week, Raymond Tubb. And someone's old building may be another person's historic treasure. May is National Preservation Month, and locally it's a time when Historic Macon Foundation and its community partners celebrate preservation successes across the community. Historic Macon Foundation is on the forefront of protecting and revitalizing historic places across the city. And this week we are going to talk about the mission of the Historic Macon Foundation as it works to become the premier preservation organization in the nation. Our guest today is the new director of Historic Macon's Foundation, Nathan Lott. We appreciate you joining us today. And you actually come to us by way of New Orleans, so tell us a little bit about your background and what brings you to Macon.
Sure thing. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, Raymond. Thank you so much for having me. I came last fall as executive director, Historic Macon Foundation, from the Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans, where I had been basically director of government and community affairs. And that organization is similar to Historic Macon in that it's been around for many decades and advocating for the stewardship of historic resources. But while I learned a tremendous amount in New Orleans, one of the very acute differences that I saw was that real estate prices had gotten so high there that the organization where I was working really had a hard time finding historic buildings that it could acquire and repair and resell at a reasonable cost. Whereas Historic Macon has been doing that for now more than a decade in Bells Hill and has a really strong operation of actually acquiring, renovating, and either renting or reselling properties. And that's still something that we were doing actively, and I think we'll be able to do for another decade to come. So that's one of the exciting things about transitioning to Macon for me, is the active hands-on preservation and construction operation that Historic Macon has.
Of course, New Orleans, one of the grand architectural cities, not just in the southeast, but in the nation, with all kinds of beautiful old architecture, a lot of great history in that city. What kind of jewels and gems did you find in Macon that kind of attracted you to this area, coming from a city like New Orleans?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some similarities, interestingly, in the historic architecture, both a lot of wood-framed buildings in both cities. Macon probably has better quality bricks. Old buildings in New Orleans were made from very soft bricks. Macon in Central Georgia has a great resource for brick making. And but one of the standouts I think anyone who visits Macon would say is the houses of worship here. Just some of the most gorgeous church buildings, synagogues. And so when my wife has visited, she said, St. Joseph's, that might be the prettiest church I've ever seen. So, it's not as large a city, but there's definitely some really fine examples of architecture here.
What about Macon's mission attracted you as well with the historic preservation?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually probably the biggest thing that stood out to me through getting to know more about Historic Macon. Obviously, it's an organization that's actually very well respected nationally for the impact that it's had, particularly given the size of the community. So the reputation preceded it, but as I went through a kind of discernment process, interview process, what stood out to me was the synergy with Macon Bib, with the UDA, with Mercer University. There is an effort in Macon, I think, to have community revitalization and community development organizations working in concert. Everybody's rowing in the same direction is how I've described that. So we're part of an ecosystem. The preservation and historic resources part of an ecosystem that is actually bigger, that is about community development, revitalization, and prosperity.
Do you find that people a lot of times kind of overlook the treasures that they may have in their own city? They just kind of take what they have for granted. I know we get a lot of movies shot here, and a lot of times it's because of the great historic architecture and some of the neat historic sites in here, from Luther Williams Field, which is one of the older minor league parks in the nation, to things like the Hay House, and of course the terminal station has a lot of different movies, a wide variety shot there, representing different periods in time. Do people sometimes maybe not appreciate just what they have in their own community sometimes?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. It's sort of a human instinct or habit, I guess, to kind of take for granted what you see every day. The stuff you grew up with, and sometimes it takes the outsider to come here to really appreciate something because they have just a different frame of reference and see it with fresh eyes. So I think that we're always at risk of that. But hopefully, through programs like our periodic walking tours and building visits, we help people, whether they've grown up in Bibb County or moved here last year, to understand and appreciate the assets and the resources here.
Well, Finding, protecting historic structures takes a spotlight this week with the 2024 Preservation Awards. And tell us about some of the winners we're going to see.
Yeah, I'm excited to say we have 10 winners across numerous categories. We were a little nervous at first because the nominations were kind of slow coming in. We always take nominations from the public. But by the time we had our awards jury meeting, we had many more projects than we could recognize, and some individuals as well. So it's going to be a great mix. We've got a primary residence on Hillendale Circle of the Thompsons, David and Sandra Lynn Thompson. We've got another mixed-use building on 2nd Street that is going to be residential above for the Gosses, Randy and Sherry Goss, with the commercial below. Churchill's on Cherry is one of our commercial winners. 555 First Street, which is going to be a sleep center downtown in an old house. It's going to be an interesting reuse of that building. People will actually go there and do sleep studies in what at one time was a house, but subsequently has had many other uses. And so now it's being reincarnated yet again. Another really exciting project is Hemlock Lofts at 805 MLK near Hemlock Street Lane, and that was an old Coca-Cola bottling plant garage.
Oh, cool.
And now it's been turned into apartments, very cool loft buildings. So great revitalization of that project. And then Billingsley Common up the street on Forsyth Street is another mixed-use project with 4 commercial spaces and apartments above. And that was a long neglected stretch of Forsyth, Old Cotton Avenue. So there's a rich history there, and now it's coming back to life, fortunately, through the reuse of the buildings and not through simply replacing them with cookie cutter, drive-through architecture.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we're also going to be recognizing some institutions and individuals because, the preservation of these buildings is great, but it happens by people and for people, right?
Right.
So we have 2 institutions that we're recognizing for their stewardship. That's the long-term care of their facilities. So the first is Mercer University for Woodruff House, which is where they have the Center for Strings and big, beautiful columned house on College Avenue that you've probably all seen. And they've had that since it was at one time home to Stratford Academy, and they've cared for it over many years and just recently put a lot of energy into repairing, maintaining, and redesigning the interiors, decorating the interiors. The other winner, kind of maybe at the other end of the spectrum in some people's minds, is the Macon Housing Authority. And they've put a great deal of resources into renovating 3 of the public housing developments, Murphy Homes, Mounts Homes, and Davis Village, I believe. And if you live near one of those or have driven by, you will have noticed they have brightly colored facades, that they've added porches onto these buildings, and they've also totally renovated the interiors and the community spaces. So for the residents of those housing developments, they will have higher quality places to call home and places to gather as community. And then our last 2 awards go to individuals. We have a Lifetime Achievement Award going to Roscoe Ross, who is a Mason whose work has been notable in Rose Hill Cemetery in particular. A lifelong Mason who's done work around the city in several public parks, but particularly in Rose Hill.
Okay.
And then our final award is to a Historic Macon volunteer from our flea market. And our flea market volunteers are critical because they drive our biggest fundraiser of the year. And so we're really excited to recognize her as well.
It always draws a crowd, and it's amazing how efficiently everything works in that. And as we were talking before the show, it takes those volunteers to make it happen.
Yeah.
Well, we've got much more to talk about. We're just getting started, and when we return, we're going to talk about how the Historic Macon Foundation serves the community. Welcome back to Central Georgia Focus. Historic Macon Foundation is at the forefront of protecting and revitalizing historic places across the city, and they've been working to save structural treasures around here since 1964. And joining us, we have Nathan Lott, the Executive Director of Historic Macon. And we wanted to talk about the fact, May is Historic Preservation Month, and you've got plenty of events going on this month to celebrate.
We do. So we're kicking off with our annual meeting and preservation awards. We'll recognize some very deserving individuals and projects and sort of celebrate a year of accomplishments organizationally. And then on May 9th, we will have a special tour of our latest historic renovation project at 169 Lamar Street, which is kind of at the edge of the Vineville area. And that's where our members and community members can come and do a walkthrough of this building that we have brought back from a state of vacancy and blight. It's not quite finished yet, so it'll be fun for people to get to see it as a work in progress, but it's going to be a 2-unit apartment building, so we'd love to have folks join us that 169 Lamar tour. We also will have a special Sydney's Salon, which is our more or less monthly book lecture series that is named in honor of Sidney Lanier. And we're going to have a special presentation about the impact of redlining. Margaret Peth did her master's thesis on this subject and is going to talk about the practice of discriminatory lending or redlining.
Right.
That really was
instituted.
And
also appraising as well for the properties. It's,
Yes. So began obviously before it was in, I guess, policy. Discrimination goes back a long time,
yes.
But was really written into law and policy in the 30s, coming out of the Depression, and it was very discriminatory lending by the Federal Housing Administration at that time, and it continues to this day, even though that's been outlawed, and banks actually have to comply with new regulations to be non-discriminatory. We know that as you were saying, in the appraisal process and in the home buying process, oftentimes African Americans are not given fair offers on their property and are discriminated against. So yeah, we'll talk some about the long history there and the effects in Macon, but also what people are doing to change that, to change the culture and be more inclusive and proactive.
And of course, you have the walking tour as well. You talked about the Lamar and
yes. So we'll have the site visit to Lamar, but also we're working with Newtown Macon to do a downtown then and now walking tour, where we'll talk about here. This is what the building was. It's some of its past life, maybe why it was built, and this is what it is today. To see that change over time and some of the adaptive use that has gone on as part of the revitalization of downtown Macon.
And such an important part of preservation is to repurpose as times change and purposes change, to give that building new life so it can continue and be useful.
Yeah. Cotton warehouses are no longer in high demand downtown, right?
But we need housing.
But yeah, we've got some really sturdy and beautiful buildings, and so yeah, it's really fascinating to see, how things have changed. Maybe a dry goods store is now, a restaurant or something like that.
That'll be a lot of fun too. You guys use a lot of innovative ways to get revitalization to happen too. Talk a little bit about that, whether it's the tax incentives where you can get a property at a lower price. Of course, it's going to be worth a lot more once you get it fixed up, but you can lock in those taxes and have some savings in return for people taking on the extra work to bring a historic home or neighborhood back.
That's right. Yeah, so we have used a lot of these tax incentives in our own development projects and sort of through that accrued a proficiency that we now offer as a fee-for-service consulting to members of the community in the development community and homeowners so that they can take advantage of these incentives. So there's both a state and a federal historic tax credit incentive. And Georgia is unique not in the nation, but in a minority of states in the nation, in that it has a program also for your primary residence. Most people in America probably can't take advantage of something like that, but in Georgia there is a state residential tax credit incentive for your primary residence that allows you to essentially get 25% back on your costs in the form of a tax credit against your state income taxes, and also, as you were saying, freeze those property taxes for 10 years so that you don't have a disincentive to invest in a historic building. We do not want people to say, oh, well, if I spend $100,000 fixing up this old building, then my property taxes are going to go up, it'll be worth more and I'll have to pay more property taxes, right. So I'm just going to sit on it and leave it.
You must get punished for fixing it up in some instances,
right.
And
so
that takes that away.
Yeah, so the property tax freeze that is baked into both the residential and commercial state laws, state incentives here in Georgia, is really another positive, unique thing that Georgia has that not every state has. So we help people take advantage of that, through our consulting services and also through our advocacy, just this past legislative session, worked with the Georgia Trust and other peer organizations around the state. Senator John Kennedy locally was a great help to us in reauthorizing that program and making sure it didn't go away, because it's been just transformative.
A number of years ago, we lost the Douglas House downtown and Tremont Temple for some construction around Novice Health and the food court that was going up there. And at that time, I worked on a series of stories with Historic Macon on what are some other properties that we are at risk at losing? What could be the next Douglas House or Tremont Temple? And that went on to become your Fading Five list that you all do each year. You've had a lot of successes with that. I know two of the properties that we featured in our original series, the Alexander School on Ingleside and the train building downtown, have found new lives and new purposes. And talk a little bit about some of the successes of the Fading Five and how it works.
Yeah, so every summer, Historic Macon names 5 sites that are in danger of fading away and being lost. And we don't just try to call them out and shame the owners. We try to work with the owners if ever possible. And in some cases have raised the money and actually acquired properties ourselves if there was a willing seller. And so that project we're going to tour May 9th at 169 Lamar was a house listed on the Fading Five many years ago, and is now, after years of fundraising and restoration, going to become home to 2 renters. So we try to be very proactive in doing that. This past summer, we removed a building in Pleasant Hill that's being turned into a community center. And a cafe. It was an old church originally, then acquired as part of a community center operation, and then sort of as an annex building, and then just vacant for many years. So now it's being returned to community use with this cafe by a local Pleasant Hill resident. So that's the kind of success story we like to highlight. The building that we added this past year was the D.T. Walton building, not far from the old Tremont Temple site.
Yes.
And it's owned by First Baptist Church, and they very much want to preserve it. So I've been in discussions with their pastor and some of their laity that are looking for opportunities to raise grant funds and fundraise to rehab that building and put it back into use.
They're right there along Cotton Avenue, and part of what's, I guess, Macon's version of Black Wall Street.
Exactly, yeah. So they're quite aware of the civil rights history in that corridor and of D.T. Walton himself. So we're cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to put the pieces together and maybe get some grant funds to help them. So that's the kind of thing we'd like to be doing with the Fading Five. There are also a few on the list that are, we haven't been able to get in dialogue with the owners, and those are the hard ones when you have an out-of-town owner that's just letting something molder.
Yeah. Well, we've got much more to talk about, and we'll be back with more in just a moment on Central Georgia Focus. Welcome back to Central Georgia Focus. We're talking about the mission of the Historic Macon Foundation with Executive Director Nathan Lott. And you, of course, have a goal to become a premier historic foundation in the country. And part of that takes money. One of your big fundraisers is the spring market. You just had that a few weeks ago, and always draws a big crowd.
Yes. I should thank the people of Macon and Central Georgia who made our fundraising flea market such a success. I think we brought in a record take in terms of sales this spring, and that doesn't happen without dozens of volunteers who have committed to helping us organize and curate that spring flea market, and they'll do it again in the fall. So if you missed it in the spring, make plans to come back in the fall. And you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, to find out when those dates are going to be. We haven't set them yet for the fall, but it'll probably be into September, early October.
And when you can, I think people are pretty clear on the economic benefits of historic preservation, because you're bringing new life to buildings, new value. So maybe buildings that didn't have a great tax value do eventually get that and are able to give back to the community. But there's also a big ecological benefit to historic preservation. If you save a house rather than it getting torn down and thrown in the landfill, keeps tons of debris out of there and preserves communities as well.
Yeah, and most people probably don't know that construction and demolition waste is actually greater by ton than all household waste in the United States. So every time you demo a house and landfill it, or anytime you even do a construction project and don't pay attention to minimizing the waste involved, you're contributing to waste and then also the associated pollution of trucking, all that tonnage. So yeah, there's a great benefit in terms of environment and climate to reusing what we have and being thoughtful stewards of any building project in terms of the materials that go into it.
Of course, sometimes properties can't be saved. I know Macon has a very active blight remediation program where they do go in and tear down blighted properties at times. Do you all work some with the city to try to determine, okay, this one maybe we don't need to look at tearing that down. This one, okay, there's not really a way to redeem this property?
Mm-hmm. Well, where we have had focused real estate investment by Historic Macon Foundation, particularly in the Bells Hill neighborhood near Mercer and in town, we have a really strong working relationship with the planning and zoning staff who oversee the historic districts. And so if it's in a designated historic district, oftentimes the staff will reach out to us and see if we might have an interest in potentially acquiring and renovating the property as an alternative to demolition. I wish we were able to do that for every house every time. Some of them, simply are too far gone, and we obviously have a limited capacity. But to the extent that we're successful raising philanthropic dollars and being really wise stewards of them, that increases our capacity to take some of these blighted houses, and hopefully if we can get to them before they become too far gone, then we can rescue them and we can put them back into use to make somebody's home.
Well, whether it's dealing with acquiring a property that maybe you all have renovated, or maybe coming up with a renovation plan and finding out about tax incentives, or volunteering for you all, how can people get in touch with Historic Macon?
Well, the easiest way would be to go to historicmacon.org. That's our website, and you'll find our phone numbers there as well, and emails. And if you want to visit us at 953rd Street in the old Fire Hall number 4, you are most welcome to do that. And we have, in addition to the other programs we've talked about, a tool library. So if you want to undertake your own renovation project or home maintenance project, we'll be happy to tell you how that works as well. And we would love to connect to the community. We always have events coming up, especially during Preservation Month this May, but year-round. And so people should definitely visit us at historicmacon.org and find out where they fit in.
Yeah, we didn't really get a chance to talk about it, but your headquarters are a bit of a renovation story and a great preservation thing with the saving of the old fire hall down there on 3rd Street.
Yes, yeah, and it's got a rich history as a fire station, and then was in various other uses and disuse for a long time. And so we've got some great historic photos showing it with the mule-drawn fire engines out front, and then also showing it at its worst, with boarded up windows and a billboard pasted on the front. So it's our hope that renovation not only is a great home for us and a place where we can have classes and actually host community partner events, but it also signals that part of downtown is being revitalized and life is coming back to it. And I hope it will be the first of many investments at that corner of downtown.
All right, well, we appreciate you joining us. Nathan Lott with Historic Macon Foundation. Thank you for joining us as well, and we will see you back here next time for Central Georgia Focus.